important from the study aspect, because what I want to be able to do is present data in a couple of different realms. I want to see the GDV, which that's, what is it, gas discharge visualization, I think, okay.
Of subtle energy.
Right, and so what that's doing is it's showing you energy patterns in their body before, and then energy patterns in their body after, and you can look at the shifts that are taking place. It gives me a lot of data to look at where these kids have too much energy, where they don't have enough energy, how it's affecting their behavior, how it's tying into medical conditions, and I know this is not a diagnostic tool, but from a medical standpoint, it gives us more insight into what's really going on in the bodies of these children that you may not otherwise know. Secondly, what I'm looking at is using neurofeedback with that. And so by brain mapping a child before, doing the Tesla light session, and then coming back and brain mapping them after, I can look at the shifts in the brain. I can look at what are their brain waves. And here's the deal, that's not woo, 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 you know, that's not waving a magic wand and making something crazy happen and working with voodoo dolls. I mean, that's science. It's looking at brain waves. It's using an EEG system that gets used all the time to look at seizure disorders and everything else under the sun. We want to look at brain waves in all of the regions of the brain. We want to look at frontal and occipital and temporal and all of those and look at, let's do this before, let's do these lights, let's do it after, what's shifting? Are we making any changes in the brain by doing this? And then one of the things that I think is really interesting is you talked about time to process this, that sometimes we do a session on someone, we'll do GDV before, we'll do GDV after. You may not really see that much of a shift within 10 to 15 minutes after doing those lights, but then you come back and you look at them 3 hours later after they've had time for this to integrate, and which is going to take up to 24 hours. Well, you know what? What if we brain map them before? We do the lights, we brain map them after, we brain map them 12 hours later, we brain map them 24 hours later. What's that going to give us from a data standpoint as far as consistency with integration, number one, which I know also has a lot to do with their systems and how able their systems are to deal with what's going on because of toxicity levels and a whole lot of other stuff we got to talk about. But still, you know, you gather enough data and you start seeing patterns. And what that gives me the ability to do, just like when we work with kids medically, we have an MD on staff that sees patients and does biomedical work, and he and I work together. A lot of times we see patients together. He has a different perspective than I do. We're both very skilled in biomedical, but I'm also very skilled in behavioral and in speech and in sensory integration dysfunction and in a lot of other things educationally that he's not. And so I bring a different perspective to the table when we see patients because I see how other pieces of the puzzle fit into the medical design that he may not always see because he's, you know, specifically looking at this more from a medical end. So when we'll see patients, we talk about histories. You know, we'll take very extensive histories on patients, and we look at development. We look at, you know, maternity. We look at the pregnancy and the birthing and the shot records, and we look at the health history from birth to where they are now. I mean, you have to take all of that into account. We look at symptoms. And after years of doing this and seeing, you know, thousands of kids, you get to a point where you can start almost putting them in camps because you see groups of kids, you see subsets of children. Well, you know, these kids all have these same symptoms and they all seem to have some pretty significant gastrointestinal problems, and they have sensory issues and they have problems with their mineral levels, and, you know, so that's this subset. This subset over here is having more problems with this or that. You see enough kids and you get to where, you know, when I see kids do this, I know that's a magnesium deficiency. We know from a sensory standpoint that when they're deficient in magnesium, we're going to see hypersensitive hearing. And 9 times out of 10, when we have kids that start taking magnesium, this stops, or at least significantly reduces. So with experience, you begin to recognize patterns and you begin to recognize symptoms and tie them to many underlying things that it then gives you the opportunity to test for and check to confirm your suspicions, right? So that's kind of exciting to me, because this gives us another tool that looks at a completely different realm than we've been really looking at, that has the ability, in my mind, to confirm what we're seeing medically, to confirm what we're seeing neurologically, to confirm what we're seeing behaviorally. You know, when you look at a child and you see their energy just off the charts, well, heck yeah, they're going to be behavioral, right? And you see a kid whose energy is extremely depleted, well, yeah, they're going to be lethargic. So you really have an opportunity to start understanding more about the whys of what's going on with them, and then we can start looking at how do we fix that? What are the answers to, what are the solutions to those problems? Are we going to see with time that it's increasing the efficacy of those things that we're doing? You and I talked before about medications. One of the things we find with neurofeedback is as the brain starts retraining itself, they don't need as much medication. So the kids that are on meds start acting over-medicated because their brain is utilizing properly what they already have, and they don't need that much medication anymore. So we end up having to titrate stuff down and change dosage because they don't need it anymore. Are we going to see the same thing with Tesla? Are we going to see better utilization of what they already have, and therefore starting to see people over-medicated to the point that we can start backing them off meds? I'm hoping we see that. I'm not real fond of meds. If we have an opportunity to do something to get the same outcome and not use synthetic medications that are going to give you equal and opposite side effects that more often than not are not good, why wouldn't we go that route? So I think there's a tremendous amount of promise. Tremendous amount of promise. And there's a lot of different things that we have to look at. We have to look at the physical realm, we have to look at the emotional, we have to look at the the anxiety, we have to look at, as you and I talked about, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. You expected, when we talked about fight and flight mode, and I talked to you about how these kids are on a precipice and they're balancing. And what does it take to send them over the edge? Right? Because when their adrenaline is pumping, and when their anxiety is high, and their OCD is high, and their paranoia is high, and their sensory integration is through the roof, it doesn't take a whole lot to send them off the edge of that cliff.
And I observed that.
You saw it firsthand, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, what happened when we did joint compressions?
They calmed right down.
They calmed right down, didn't they? You saw a child that was completely out of control. How long did it take me to get them under control?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, right? Okay. So what happens is when we start putting sensory into their system, and that can be joint compressions, that can be jumping on a trampoline, giving them proprioceptive input that provides joint compressions, that releases chemicals in their system. It's a calming mechanism for them. You see these kids kind of back down that mountain. See, most people are down here all the time, and throughout the day, things happen that are stressful and you begin to ramp up a little bit, but most people don't ever get here. They get to hyperadrenaline mode when you get robbed or you get accosted, or maybe a once in a lifetime or a couple times in a lifetime situation where your fear and your adrenaline are just out of control. It doesn't happen on a daily basis to most people. Well, guess what? Our kids stay there. They don't back down. They're there 24/7. So they behave in class, and teachers are like, he just went ballistic and started throwing chairs, and there's no excuse for that. Well, guess what? He's there.
Well, I remember we had one of the children, and I don't remember, what was his name, the fellow that came in that would not do the lights until... Logan, okay. He came in and basically said no.
Right.
And instead of trying to force him, we introduced him to the lights,
right.
Gave him some indicators as to what they were and how they worked, right. And turned them on just so that he could see that they weren't going to bite him.
Right.
And then within about 7 minutes, something like that, he was calming down and became more receptive, and then he was very okay with receiving the session. But
Right.
it wasn't from pulling his arm. It was
No,
from,
absolutely not.
It was from respecting him as a human being, not as a problem,
Right.
but as someone who just needed to get more data to understand what we were asking him to do.
Well, and think about this too. When we talked about parasympathetic versus sympathetic, and you expected to see fight or flight mode and where? Sympathetic, didn't you? I said, he's in fight or flight mode. You said, no, he's not. I said, yeah, he is.
Yeah, I didn't know better.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying, because that's not typically what you're going to see.
Exactly.
You typically see somebody in fight or flight mode. From your experience, you're seeing it in sympathetic. And I'm saying, no. Because sympathetic is, you know, it's parasympathetic and sympathetic, difference being parasympathetic, autonomic. You know, you don't have to think about your heart beating for it to beat. You don't have to think about your lungs breathing for them. They do it automatically without you even having to think about it, right? Well, fight or flight mode is a fear response, and you're expecting that to be driven by thought. You know, I feel like I'm in danger, therefore my adrenaline system is going to kick in, da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, not so with kids that have autism spectrum disorders. It's autonomic. It's something that they have absolutely no control over, and that's exactly what you saw. You pull up parasympathetic, and what do you see? Fight and flight mode. And that's what we have to back these kids down out of. And I think I don't know. I mean, we have a lot more work to do to figure out how this is going to tie into autism, but I think we have a very good opportunity of backing these kids out of this in a lot of ways that we haven't had access to before. It's going to be really fascinating to see. But I'm going to have to find a way to get the GDV system, because I think it's going to be difficult for us to get the data that we need. I think it's going to be difficult for us to monitor this in a significant way where we can begin to see patterns if we don't have any way visually to look at what is that doing to the system.
Well, here's a good opportunity for you to plug Autistic Solution Center.
Autism Solution Center, right.
Okay. And tell us how they can contact you.
Well, let me tell you this. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that for over 8 years has been providing all of our services to families at no cost to ensure that every one of these families had access to the care that they need regardless of their ability to pay. Unfortunately, in April of this year, we had to start charging some fees for a little bit of what we do because we're in danger of closing, and that's just not an option because there is no place else worldwide that does what we do. And the parents that come here will tell you that. So for anyone interested in learning more about us or wanting to be involved, you can go to autismsolutioncenter.com or .org, either one. Or you can contact us at 901-758-8288.
And I have a highly good hunch that you're going to be expanding.
I think so. And by the way, thank you, because you certainly took time out of your busy schedule to spend several days here, and you know, there's nothing in that for you, and yet you took it on and wanted to make a difference in the lives of these kids, even though you're not getting compensated for that. So that speaks volumes about where your heart is in helping these kids too. So thank you for taking the time to do that.
Well, you're quite welcome. So in conclusion,
hint, hint. Yeah, I'm excited about it. I think with everything that we've had exposure to over the last 3 days, I think we have an incredible opportunity to change the lives of an awful lot of people.
well, thank you so much for your feedback.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for being here.
Okay.